Welcome to the Quiznek.com podcast, Indigenous Nations and Their History. Today, we delve into the pre-colonial era, exploring the diverse cultures and rich traditions of Indigenous peoples in Canada before European contact. The story of Indigenous nations in Canada is deeply intertwined with the country's history. For thousands of years, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities thrived in what is now known as Canada, shaping its cultural tapestry with their unique languages and systems of governance. With over 600 recognized Indigenous nations in Canada, each with its distinct culture and traditions, the diversity among these communities is truly remarkable. Many Indigenous nations have entered into treaty agreements with the British Crown and later the Canadian government, outlining the rights and responsibilities of both parties. These agreements are crucial in understanding the historical relationship between Indigenous peoples and the colonial powers. From the late 19th to the late 20th century, Indigenous children were forcibly taken from their families and placed in residential schools, where they were stripped of their cultural identities in an attempt to assimilate them into Euro-Canadian culture. The intergenerational trauma caused by this dark chapter in history continues to impact Indigenous communities today. In 1982, the Constitution Act recognized and affirmed the existing rights of Indigenous peoples, including their land rights, marking an important step towards reconciliation and recognition of Indigenous sovereignty. The history of Indigenous nations in Canada is a testament to resilience, cultural richness, and ongoing struggles for justice and equality. Join us as we explore the enduring legacy of Indigenous peoples in shaping the past, present, and future of the country. Rights, cultures, and traditions. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established in 2008 with the goal of documenting the history and impacts of residential schools and fostering reconciliation between Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous Canadians. Key concepts: sovereignty, example, decolonization example, cultural resilience example. Practical examples. Canada supports the UN Declaration, which sets global standards for the treatment and rights of Indigenous peoples. Several Indigenous nations are actively reclaiming their traditional lands through legal means and protests, as seen in the land back movements. Educational institutions are integrating Indigenous history, culture, and perspectives into their curricula to raise awareness and understanding among non-Indigenous Canadians through cultural education programs. In conclusion, Indigenous nations play a crucial role in shaping Canadian history. Their contributions, struggles, and resilience define the cultural narrative of the country. Recognizing their rights, returning their lands, and honoring their cultures are vital for fostering reconciliation and healing between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. Trade networks and Indigenous history. In the pre-colonial era, extensive trade networks were established among Indigenous peoples. These trade networks in Canadian history encompass systems of exchange that, in the history of Canada, trade networks connected various regions, peoples, and economies, playing a vital role in the development of Indigenous communities and European settlements. Indigenous trade networks and European trade networks were key players in this interconnected web. These networks promoted interdependence among different groups, fostering mutually beneficial relationships and resource sharing. European colonization efforts often aimed to control trade routes and resources, impacting Indigenous trade practices significantly. Cities like Montreal and Quebec flourished as essential trade hubs, underscoring the pivotal role of trade networks in urban development. Trade webs involving Indigenous peoples sometimes carried political implications, as seen in alliances formed through marriage and trade. These networks were complex systems that not only facilitated economic exchange but also led to cultural interactions and transformations, shaping the historical vector. The impact of colonization in Canadian history is profound and multifaceted, shaping the relationships between Indigenous peoples and settlers and influencing the country's development. Understanding the effects of colonization is crucial for comprehending the complexities of contemporary Indigenous settler relationships, the historical injustices faced by Indigenous communities, and the ongoing repercussions of colonization. It serves as the foundation for discussions on reconciliation and the importance of Indigenous rights in present-day Canada. Colonization in Canada dates back to Norse explorers around 1000 AD, but significant European settlement began in the late 15th century with figures like John Cabot and Jacques Cartier. The rivalry between the British and French for dominance in North America impacted various indigenous groups through alliances, trade, and warfare. The establishment of the Canadian Confederation in 1867 further solidified colonial structures, leading to the marginalization of Indigenous rights. The imposition of federal controls over Indigenous lands can be traced back to the Indian Act of 1876, which regulated many aspects of Indigenous life and restricted cultural practices and governance. Residential schools, which emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, aimed to assimilate Indigenous children, resulting in significant cultural disruption and trauma within Indigenous communities. Key concepts to grasp include colonialism, which involves acquiring and controlling territories, often leading to resource exploitation and social changes. Decolonization, on the other hand, is the process through which colonized nations and peoples reclaim autonomy and cultural identity, often through movements advocating for Indigenous rights and sovereignty. Cultural assimilation occurs when a minority group adopts the customs of the dominant culture, sometimes at the expense of their own cultural identity. Efforts to address Indigenous disparities include the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples in 1996, which offered recommendations to tackle historical and ongoing challenges faced by Indigenous peoples. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission from 2008 to 2015 focused on the legacy of residential schools and called for actions to promote reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Landback movements across Canada advocate for the return of lands to Indigenous peoples, emphasizing the importance of Indigenous land rights. French colonization in Canada, exemplified by Jacques Cartier and Quebec City, played a significant role in shaping the country's history. Jacques Cartier, a renowned French explorer, was instrumental in establishing New France in the 16th century, paving the way for French influence in North America. Quebec City, founded in 1608, remains one of Canada's oldest and most historically significant cities, serving as a center of French settlement and culture. In the early European colonization of North America, Quebec City, founded by French explorer Samuel de Champlain, played a pivotal role and continues to be a hub of French-Canadian culture and history. Designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1985, Quebec City is considered the heart of French-Canadian culture, characterized by strong French influences in language and architecture. Quebec City, a vibrant blend of history, culture, and traditions, holds a significant place in Canadian heritage. The city witnessed the pivotal Battle of the Plains of Abraham in 1759, a turning point leading to British control over Quebec. Emphasizing the importance of French language and culture, the Official Languages Act and Quebec's Bill 101 showcase the province's commitment to preserving its unique identity. Exploring practical examples, Old Quebec stands out as a well-preserved historic district with cobblestone streets, the iconic Chateau Frontenac, and colonial-era buildings. The Plains of Abraham, now a sprawling urban park, serves as a commemorative site with educational monuments and museums. The Winter Carnival, a globally renowned festival, showcases Quebecois culture through vibrant parades and festivities. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 marked a significant milestone in Canadian history, concluding the 7 Years' War and solidifying British dominance in North America. This treaty reshaped the region's map, transferring French territories to British control, including Canada. The transition from French to British governance brought about profound changes in legal, political, and cultural systems, shaping the future trajectory of Canada. Quebec City's rich heritage and cultural diversity exemplify the fusion of French and English influences in Canadian history. As a key player in shaping Canada's identity, the city attracts visitors worldwide, especially during events like the Winter Carnival and the Quebec City Summer Festival. Moving forward, the War of 1812 emerged as a pivotal conflict between the United States and Great Britain from 1812 to 1815. This war played a crucial role in fostering Canadian national identity and unity among diverse groups in British North America. Indigenous nations allied with the British during this period to defend their lands against American expansion, underscoring the complex relationships between Indigenous peoples and colonial powers. Key examples from the War of 1812 include the Battle of Queenston Heights, Battle of York, Toronto, Battle of Lake Erie, and Battle of Waterloo. These engagements not only shaped military history, but also laid the foundation for discussions on Confederation among British North American colonies, emphasizing the importance of unity against external threats. Lastly, the Charlottetown Conference of September 1864 marked a significant milestone on the road to Confederation and nationhood in Canada. This pivotal gathering set the stage for the Confederation of Canada, highlighting the collaborative efforts and vision that led to the formation of the Canadian nation. In 1864, the Charlottetown Conference marked a turning point in Canadian history, leading to the consolidation of multiple British North American colonies into a unified federal dominion. This significant event took place in September 1864 in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. The process of uniting separate colonies into one Dominion of Canada culminated in 1867. This system of governance involved the division of power between a central authority and constituent political units, such as the provinces and the federal government in Canada. Economic cooperation among the colonies was crucial to promote trade and address defense concerns against potential U.S. aggression. The Charlottetown Conference was not merely a meeting. It was a crucial step towards the creation of Canada as a nation. Understanding its significance helps learners appreciate the complexities and collaborative efforts that shaped the country. The British North America Act of 1867, also known as the BNA Act, is a foundational document in Canadian history that signifies the Confederation of Canada and the establishment of Canada as a self-governing dominion within the British Empire. It laid the groundwork for Canada's political and legal framework, and on July 1st, 1867, Canada officially began its journey as a nation. The BNA Act played a pivotal role in the evolution of Canadian federalism by establishing the principle of federalism, dividing powers between the national and provincial governments. The federal government handles national issues, while provinces oversee local matters. It also introduced the concept of responsible government, ensuring executive accountability to the elected legislature. The Act outlined a process for future amendments, initially requiring British approval, which evolved leading to the patriation of the Constitution in 1982. The significance of the British North America Act becomes evident in understanding Canada's development as a unified nation, embodying unity, diversity, and the continuous evolution of Canadian governance and identity. Western expansion in Canada during the 19th century was a transformative period where settlers, explorers, and government officials ventured into the Western territories, reshaping the nation's identity and trajectory. The notion that Americans were destined to expand influenced the dynamics of Western expansion in Canada. Indigenous nations such as the Métis, First Nations, and Inuit played a significant role in shaping Canadian attitudes and policies during this expansion. The Canadian Pacific Railway played a crucial role in connecting the East and West, facilitating trade and immigration. Western expansion in Canada was marked by significant demographic shifts, economic growth, and conflicts over land and rights, especially concerning Indigenous populations. Understanding this history is essential for grasping the context of contemporary Canada. During westward expansion, Indigenous peoples faced resistance as Canada moved towards confederation and nationhood. Key concepts include the inherent right of Indigenous nations to self-govern, make decisions about their lands, and preserve their traditions. Efforts are ongoing to revive languages, traditions, and cultural practices threatened by colonization. Canada's contributions and experiences during World War I played a significant role in shaping modern Canadian history. Canada's involvement in World War I had a profound impact on the nation and its people, highlighting the sacrifices made and the resilience shown during times of conflict. Canada's involvement in World War I from 1914 to 1918 was a defining moment that shaped its national identity and international standing. The war had profound effects on Canada's military, economic, and social aspects. Canada emerged from the war with a stronger sense of identity, representing itself at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 and gaining a separate signature on the Treaty of Versailles. World War I played a crucial role in shaping Canadian national identity, fostering unity and a sense of shared sacrifice among Canadians. Women played a significant role in the workforce and organizations like the Canadian Red Cross, leading to advancements in women's rights post-war. The impact of World War I on Canada was transformative, catalyzing changes in society, governance, and national identity, setting the stage for Canada's evolution in the 20th century. Moving on to World War II, Canada played a significant role in the Allied war effort, influencing its identity, international relations, and post-war policies. The country's involvement in World War II shaped its national identity, economic landscape, and international relations for decades to come. Transitioning to the Cold War era, Canada's position and policies during this period were crucial. The Cold War, lasting from 1947 to 1991, was a significant part of Canadian history that influenced its foreign policy, military engagements, and domestic affairs. The era emphasized values of peacekeeping, diplomacy, and Western alliances, showcasing Canada's dedication to international cooperation and security. Shifting focus to the Quiet Revolution in modern Canadian history, particularly in Quebec during the 1960s, Premier Jean Lesage led a transformation emphasizing Quebec's autonomy and resource management. The movement, with its motto Maîtres chez nous, Masters in Our Own House, secularized Quebec society, reducing the Catholic Church's influence in education and healthcare. State-owned enterprises like Hydro-Quebec played a key role in economic restructuring, while social reforms aimed to modernize Quebec's social fabric. The Quiet Revolution marked a significant period of change in Quebec and Canadian history, highlighting the decline of the Catholic Church's influence and the modernization of Quebec's social and economic landscape. The Quiet Revolution in Quebec marked a significant period of transformation towards greater autonomy and Quebecois identity. Social democratic policies were introduced to tackle social inequality and enhance government involvement in the economy. For instance, Hydro-Quebec was established in 1963 to oversee the province's electricity resources, driving economic development. The education system was revamped to promote secular education and diminish the Church's influence over schools. Moreover, the Quebec Pension Plan, launched in 1966, became a model for social security programs nationwide. This era's impact on Quebec and Canada was profound, reshaping political, social, and economic landscapes. Its enduring legacy continues to shape contemporary discussions on identity, culture, and governance in Canada. Moving forward, let's delve into Indigenous rights movements in modern Canadian history. Advocacy for Indigenous rights and recognition has been a significant force in Canada, with over 1.7 million Indigenous individuals identified in the 2021 census, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. The history of Canada is intertwined with the effects of colonialism, notably through the Indian Act of 1876, which regulated various aspects of Indigenous life. Despite numerous treaties signed between Indigenous nations and the Crown, many agreements were not honored, leading to ongoing disputes. In 1990, a land dispute in Oka, Quebec, sparked a confrontation between Mohawk protesters and Canadian military forces, highlighting persistent tensions over land and Indigenous rights. A pivotal moment arrived in 1997, with a landmark Supreme Court ruling recognizing Indigenous land rights and affirming the existence of Aboriginal title in Canada. Subsequently, the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2008 aimed to address the legacy of residential schools and advocated for measures to restore Indigenous rights. Key concepts include the inherent right of Indigenous peoples to self-determination in their political status and the pursuit of their economic, social, and cultural advancement. Legal acknowledgement of Indigenous land rights is often pursued through negotiations or legal means to reclaim lands seized during colonization. Efforts to preserve and revitalize Indigenous languages, traditions, and cultural practices are crucial to ongoing dialogues on Indigenous rights in Canada. Indigenous rights movements emphasize sustainable relationships with the land, drawing on traditional ecological knowledge. These movements are vital in safeguarding Indigenous practices threatened by assimilation policies. Let's explore some practical examples before reflecting on these critical issues. Thank you for listening to the Quiznek.com podcast.